Alright, today I am back with my fourth tutorial on the third page of the mini album. This one is a little bit more complicated, but a lot more fun. So stay tuned, and as always, if you're interested in seeing more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Hey and howdy everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing on with this Watercolor Floral mini album. We are doing page 3 today. So let's dive in and get started. I'm going to take my base page and I'm just going to add 2 tall thin flaps to either side so it kind of opens up a little bit like a book. So we're going to trim them to 4.5 and then score at the half mark along the long edge. This way our flaps will be 4 inches wide on either side because our page is 8 inches total. And we're going to go ahead and trim them down to 10 3/4 to match the page's height. Let's go ahead and get them glued down and we will move on to the interactive element. So to make the pop-up elements for this page, we are going to need 2 pieces of cardstock cut to 1 inch by 5 inches. And then we're going to need 2 cut to 1 inch by 1 3/4 inches. So now that we have our 4 pieces cut, we need to score them. So for the 1 and 1 3/4 inch ones, we are going to score at the 1/2 inch mark on either side. So it's 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and then 1/2 inch. And we're going to do that for both pieces. And for our 5 inch by 1 inch piece, we are going to score at 1/2 inch and then 1 1/4 inches. And then we're going to flip it around again and score at 3/4 inch. So before we can go ahead and attach our pop-up elements, we need to get our pattern paper placed down because this will lay on top of the pattern paper. So let's go ahead and choose some paper. So the paper should be trimmed to 7 3/4 by 10 5/8 because it's the standard size for our pages. And then the pattern paper size for our side flaps should be 3 3/4 because they're 4 inches wide. And then we'll trim them down to 10 5/8 of an inch tall. So before I go ahead and finish gluing everything down on the inside of this page, I stopped to consider what it was that I wanted to do to help hold the page closed. In this particular case, I decided that I'm going to use some magnets on a journaling card like we did for one of our previous pages. So now that we have everything glued down on the inside of this page, we are going to start the layout for the pop-up elements. So to start, we are going to need some cardstock cut so that we have the photo mat area on top. So again, this is another instance where if I had thought it through and figured out what I wanted to do from the very beginning, I would have not needed to cut separate pieces. It could have just been one piece and scored down the center. But alas, I didn't think about it again. I was just going to do single photo mats, but once I had them done, I realized that I wanted to give a little bit more space for photos. And so I added another component so they flip open. So I cut these to 4.5 by 6.5, and the pattern paper to go on top of them is cut to 4.25 by 6.25. And I just use the same pattern paper for the fronts of both. So here I am deciding that I actually want a little bit more space on these, so I'm going to cut 2 more pieces of cardstock, and I'm going to cut them to 5 by 6.5. I'll cut 2, one for the top and one for the bottom, and then I'm going to score at the 1/2 inch mark along the long edge. So I end up with a 1/2 inch tab and the same size as my earlier photo mats at 6.5 by 4.5. So these should match up nicely, and I think I'm going to use some magnets just to hold them together, so one for each should be more than sufficient. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one on the back side that will be hidden because that part won't be seen. It will be under the pop-up. And then the other one I'm going to put on the top so that it is hidden and held in place well underneath the pattern paper. So I'm just going to go ahead and glue these together. So now that I have both of these together, I'm giving some additional thought to the magnet on the back side. I want to make sure that it is held in place very well. So I'm just cutting a couple of pieces of cardstock down to a smaller size, and I am just going to glue them over top of that magnet that's going to sit on the back. And that way I can make sure that they are held in place very well and will stay there. Alright, so now that I have both of my opening photo mats put together, it's time to lay them out and work on the configuration for the pop-up element. So in order to do this, we need to make sure that the smaller piece that is cut to 1 inch by 1 3/4 inches, it will attach on the 1/2 inch side, one to the back, and we're going to put it about 3/4 of an inch or so down in the center, as you can see here. And the other 1/2 inch piece will actually attach to the base page. So we're just going to go ahead and do that for both of the photo mat pieces and make sure that you keep them straight. That way there won't be any issues when they pop open when you open your page. Alright, so now it's time to work on the larger piece, the piece that is 5 inches by 1 inches. So what I'm doing here is I'm applying glue only to the area along the 3-inch section of the piece that will adhere to the back of the photo mat. So I have it laid out so that it is lined up with the 3-inch, with the 3/4 inch score, 3-inch section, and then the 3/4 inch section and 1/2 inch section. And then it will be reversed on this one. And again, I'm just applying glue to the section of the 3-inch section that will be attached to the photo mat component. And make sure that you don't get this past your score on your page fold, because then otherwise you're gonna start having issues. Alright, so now that that's attached, we're going to actually attach it to the base page. So I'm applying glue to the 1/2 inch tabs on the pop-up components. And then I'm going to go ahead and press those down. And this one, since I aligned it to the left side of the page, that's how I'm pressing it down. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on both of mine before I attach the other piece. And again, I'm just eyeballing. You can measure so that everything is completely perfectly aligned. I never have the patience for that, unless it's something that's going to be very visually obvious if I get it very wrong. Alright, so now that we have that component attached to the base page, now we're going to attach the last component to our side flaps on the left and the right. And that way, when you open the page, it will pop up. So to do that, we are going to apply adhesive to the 3/4 inch piece on the ends of the cardstock. And then we're just going to press and hold it down. And as you can see, now our element pops up. So we're just going to go ahead and do that on our other one as well. So So now we have our pop-up elements completed. It's time to do the front of the page. So again, I'm going to use one of these pretty journaling cards and attach magnets to it and the flaps on the page to create a closure. So let's go ahead and pick out some paper. So we're going to cut our paper for our flaps on the front of the page to 10 5/8 by 3 3/4. And then we're going to cut out a mat for our journaling card to 4 1/4 by 3 1/4. And to help the mat for the journaling card match a little bit better, I'm just going to use my 1/4 inch crocodile to corner or to round the corners to match. Before we can go ahead and glue everything down, we need to attach the magnets. So I'm going to add 4 magnets, 1 in each corner of my journaling card. So these will go between the cardstock and the journaling card, so they'll be held in place very firmly. And then once I have those attached, I'm going to use them as a guide to attach them to the flaps on my page. Alright, so now that we have the magnets under the journaling card, we're going to use them as a guide to attach them to our front cover. So I'm just placing magnets to match up to the locations on the journaling card, and then I'm going to place a piece of double-sided adhesive underneath each one. And then once I have that done, I'm just going to press it in place on the 2 flaps where I want it. So I'm just going to try and center it, just eyeballing it on the center of my page. And then once I'm done making sure that my magnets are adhered really well, I'm going to go ahead and place down my pattern paper on my front flaps. And there we have the front of the first page. So let's get started on the back of the third page. This one is going to have another pop-up element, but it will be a little bit different. So let's go ahead and create our top flap. This will open up. So this is cut to 6 inches by 8 inches, and I scored it at the 1/2 inch mark along the long edge. So let's attach this and we can work on the next component. So to create the base component that will cause this to open when you open the flap, we're going to cut a piece to 8 by 4. We're going to score along the long edge at 2 inches, so it will be completely cut in half, and then we're going to score the other way at 4 inches. And then we're going to take a ruler and from the center measure 2 inches out on either side, and then we're going to go ahead and score diagonally across from the 2 to the 4 and then the 2 to the 4 on the other side as well. And those should cross dead center against all of your other score lines. So we're going to go ahead and fold along the score lines and burnish really, really well, because I've used thick cardstock on this so that it will hold up to popping up many, many times, but it also makes the component much thicker. So we need to make sure that those score lines are burnished really, really, really well so they'll stay flat. And then I apologize, I did not get this on camera, but to fold this, just press in along the score lines on the long edges, and then along the diagonal scores, pop them down so that it looks like this. And once you have it folded correctly, you want to burnish along those folds again, just to make sure that you get a nice flat component. And then we're just going to snip off a little bit of the tip, not much, just a couple millimeters. And then this component will go on our flap like this. So now let's go ahead and make the pop-up mats that are part of this. So I'm going to cut this to 4 inches, and then I'm going to score at 3, and then 6, and 9, and then I'm going to cut at 9.5 because my paper isn't quite big enough to do this. So I will cut another piece that is 4 by 3 inches, and then I will attach it to that 1/2 inch tab that we just made. So now that we've got that attached, you can see how this is taking shape. And this will be attached to our pop-up component that we just created. And it will be attached just like this. So you align the outer edge to those, and there will be a space between the pop-up piece and those. And they attach on either side. So make sure that the middle part is pointing out and not in. The middle fold is pointing out and not in. And let's go ahead and glue this down. So to do that, on the top edge of the pop-up component, we are going to apply adhesive to where we will attach that. We're only going to do this on the top half because on the bottom half, it's going to be on the other side. So that attaches down, and just line up your corners, your top and your right-hand side, just line them up and make sure you press it down because you want a nice firm hold on this. And then we're going to flip it over so that we can do it to the other side. And again, make sure you press it down very firmly because you really need a good hold on this. so you can see that how it will pop up. So before we can actually attach it to our page, we want to pick our pattern paper because that needs to be placed before we add the pop-up component. So let's pick some out and get it put down. So now that I have that paper placed, I have realized that I need to figure out what I want to do with the bottom. And so I think I'm just going to add a simple flap that will be large enough for a large photomat, but will keep the page more simple because the top component is somewhat complicated. All right, so now we're going to make the flap for the bottom, and I'm going to cut my cardstock to 5 3/8 by 8.5. And then I'm going to score on the short side 1/2 inch in. So when we fold that over, we get a page size for our flap of 8 inches by 5 3/8 of an inch. So let's go ahead and glue that down, and then we're going to work on how to keep these pages closed. So I think I'm going to go with my kind of standard with my magnets. And because this is heavier cardstock, and especially the top piece is a much heavier component, I'm going to do 2 up top and 2 on the bottom just for good measure. So I'm just prepping all my magnets for my base page to make sure that they will stick really, really well. And I'm going to apply some adhesive to the back of my pattern paper that I cut earlier and glue it down, because remember, our pop-up component is going to sit on top of our pattern paper. So I'm just choosing a piece of pattern paper that I like for my top portion on the inside of this page, and I'm going to cut it down to 5 1/4 by 7 3/4. And then I'm going to cut a second piece from the same paper to 7 3/4 by 5 1/8 to go on the inside of my bottom flap. So let's go ahead and glue down our pattern paper on both the top and the bottom side flap so that we can attach our pop-up component. So now that we have all our pattern paper in place, we can attach our pop-up component. To do this, I am going to find the center of my page, and I'm going to use that as a guide to glue this down so that I can make sure that it is centered. So I'm going to apply glue to only the triangular part of the bottom piece, and then I'm going to put that in place. So I'm going to put it just shy of the fold in my top flap, and I'm going to press it down and make sure that it is centered and even. And then I'm going to go ahead and burnish that down, because you need to make sure that this has a very, very good hold. And then I'm going to repeat that for the top triangular piece and make sure that you're only getting adhesive on those triangular pieces. And then I'm going to press and hold that down as well and burnish it like crazy. Okay, so now we have our pop-up component in place on the inside, so it's time to choose some pattern paper to cover our front. So I'm choosing the same that I chose for my flaps on the inside, and I am going to cut the top flap piece to 7 3/4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm going to cut the bottom side flap piece to 7 3/4 inches by 5 1/8 of an inch. So there we have our third page completed. Next up will be our fourth and fifth page. And as always, if you're interested in seeing more, make sure you click on that subscribe button. Thanks, everyone.